When one is learning Torah or any aspects of Torah, it's very important to be paying attention to all the details and not just the major ideas. An example of this is our study tonight. We're going to look at Mirza Hashem, one of the kelim that's found in the Mishkan and this week's Parshat Truma, and instead of focusing in on what is normally looked at as the ikar part, the major part of this article, we're going to focus in on what seems to be an ancillary part and see how this part is really a major function as well, and it's no less precious than the article itself. When talking about the Aron, the Ark, the holiest part of found in the Kodesh Kodashim, the holiest part of the Mishkan, so we know that the Ark had on it, as we've spoken about in the years past, a golden crown. It had the kruvim, the angelic figures on it. It had within it the broken luchos, the luchos. It had in it the man, right? It had in it some very special things. What we don't normally focus in on is what was found outside the Aron, and that will be our study tonight. And again, it's a demonstration of how every single pasuk in Chumash is here to teach us lessons, and our responsibility is to be able to uncover the depths in every single pasuk and the lessons that it teaches us for our lives, that even at face value, when we learn something and say, this is really irrelevant, chas v'shalom, for our lives, to be able to open up our minds and our hearts, as well as the Sfarim, and see how indeed relevant it is. And today's example will be proof of this. The Chumash tells us in the 25th chapter, the 14th verse, and the 15th verse, and insert the staves in the rings on the sides of the ark with which to carry the ark. So on the side of the Aron, there were rings, and inside the rings were poles to carry the Aron. And the Chumash tells us, the staves shall remain in the rings of the ark, they may not be removed from it. So here we find a beferish halacha in the Chumash, that while other things, like the Mizbeach, like the Shulchan, had poles in which to carry it, and the poles were taken out when they encamped, the poles had to be kept on the Aron at all times. Lo yasur mimenu, you were not allowed to take off the poles ever. So we look at this and we say to ourselves, what's the significance of these poles? And why is it necessary that the poles become part and parcel of the Aron, that they never shall be removed, that it becomes part of the Aron itself? So the Art Scrolls Torah Chumash tells us the staves of the ark had to be left in the rings permanently, and one who removed them was in violation of both the positive and negative commandments that are found in this verse. Now, what's the significance of this? So the Sefer Chinuch, the Lev Tahor, brings down in source number 3. He says, Mitam ha-mitzvah, misharshe ha-mitzvah, lefisha aron mishkan ha-Torah, v'hi kol ikarenu v'kvodenu, because the Aron had in it the Torah, which is the essence, v'nichayvanu linhog bo kol kavod, and we have to treat it with greater honor. Therefore, we are told not to take off these badim, these poles, because perhaps the Klal Yisrael will have to leave very suddenly, and maybe when they're putting in the poles in a rush, they may not put it in as carefully as they should, and then something may, God forbid, happen to the Aron. So a technical reason, says the Sefer Chinuch, why we need to have the poles in at all times, is because to ensure that it will be sturdy whenever they would travel. And they didn't know when they would travel. As soon as the cloud lifted, that's when they traveled, but they had no advance warning. So therefore, you won't worry that anything should happen to the Aron. Now, he then brings a second interpretation. He says in the bracket in 3, Va'ol tam acher, shekol kli hamikdash surata mechuyevet lermoz inyanim gedolim elyonim. All the things that were found in the Mishkan and the Beit HaMikdash hint at very, very great and lofty things. And kedei she'adam nifal l'tova mitoch machshavatam bahem V'ratzah hakel l'tovatenu shelo tifseit oto hatzira afilu l'fi sha'ah. So explains the Lev Tahor, the Sefer Chinuch, has the following. He says, because when we think about the items that were found in the Mishkan, in the Beis HaMikdash, and these items have to conjure up certain thoughts. Obviously, they're very elevated thoughts beyond our understanding. But the picture that we conjure up in our mind, explains Lev Tahor, based on Sefer Chinuch, we need to conjure up in our mind that the Aron looked like something which had poles attached. So that when we think of the Aron, we think of the crown, and we think of the kruvim, what should also come into our mind are these poles, are these badim that were attached on either side of the Aron. They are part and parcel of what the Aron is about. And as the Lev Tahor knows, and we will speak about ourselves, we know that the honest truth is that when the Levim carried the Aron, we'll talk about this at length, that the Aron was no say and no stop, that really